Welcome to Humanist Views, a program where we look at current issues from a humanist point of view. On tonight's program, we're going to take a look at one of the core things that is part of humanism, and that is our approach to science and thinking and taking a look at issues. And we're going to look at the concept of skepticism as how we humanists, freethinkers, and atheists like to look at it. It's an important concept, but it's not necessarily what people might mean colloquially. So we want to look at it in a way that's important, and why it's an important concept for those of us who are freethinkers and atheists, and how we approach the world. And my guest tonight is Kammy Lyon. And welcome, Kammy.
Thank you.
And she is with Skeptic.org as well as the Minnesota Skeptics.
That's right.
So those can be found online, and you'll see the website links during the program. So feel free to write those down and check on them. So let's get started. How did you get into being a freethinker and a skeptic?
Well, I was raised in a nominally Christian home. You know, the parents sent us to Sunday school, I think, so they could sleep in, kind of thing. But then I became a born-again Christian when I was in my early 20s, I would say. And I was really, really into it. I taught teenage Sunday school and all kinds of things, and I was, but I realized after a while that all of this Holy Spirit that I was feeling, it was something that I was just making myself feel. And I thought, well, if it's not really there and I'm making myself feel it, then why am I bothering doing all this ritual stuff? And I started to just look around and think about things and how the whole thing was probably just a big story that was made up. And I, really just finally started identifying as an atheist, like I just don't believe any of that. And I thought that it was quite novel that I'd come across this idea. And then much later, I read The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins. And this is all, I didn't start reading that until after 1995.
Okay.
And yeah, so very late. I mean, I made it quite late. And I read The God Delusion, and all of a sudden I realized, oh my goodness, I'm not the only one. I'm really not the only one. And the way I've been thinking is exactly like this. And so then I started looking into, different things. And I was a professional dog walker at the time, so I started listening to podcasts. And I listened to The Skeptic's Guide to the Universe,
okay.
And so that got me into skepticism.
Okay.
And the truth is, I'm an atheist skeptic, or / skeptic. There's a lot of good reasons to be an atheist or call yourself an atheist, and I do that to make sure that people know that atheists are around them, and that we're nice people and responsible people, and maybe you didn't even know one, but now you do, and you can't hardly deny that we're pretty nice people, or at least some of us are. So I'm very, I'm careful to identify as an atheist, but it all comes, for me, under the same heading: free thinking, skepticism, atheism, humanism, all of that.
Yeah, that's a pretty good approach on that. Speaking of the nice thing, the little old lady next door, as we like to refer to her, when she found out I was an atheist, she kept saying, "But you're so nice."
But you're so nice. I know. How could you be?
How could you be one of those? And it took her a while to connect, and we actually watched a short history of atheism done by Jonathan Miller, and she found that rather fascinating, so that helped on that part of it. So when we talk about skepticism in this case, what do we mean?
Well, when I talk about skepticism, and I'm primarily involved in skepticism in an outreach capacity, that's what I do for Skeptic is arrange events and stuff, and outreach is it's about promoting critical thinking.
Okay.
Promoting the scientific method, promoting intellectualism, particularly these days when there's so much anti-intellectualism around. I mean, it really needs to be fought against. And then pick your topic once you're in skepticism and promoting critical thinking, any topic you want, and it can be as frivolous as Bigfoot, or it can be as really serious public health issue like vaccination.
Correct.
And
yeah.
but all of them fall under the umbrella in skepticism of applying critical thinking and rational thought to coming to conclusions about the topics at hand.
Okay, and we've talked about critical thinking on this program before, but please let's reintroduce that to new viewers possibly.
Well, when I think of critical thinking, for me, it's such a whole life process. It's just really part of who I am, and I feel sometimes like I'm surrounded by people who aren't. And I don't mean that in a bad, I guess it sounds denigrating, but the truth is there's just a lot of people who weren't ever taught to think this way. But what I mean by it is that it's evidence-based, right? Somebody tells you something, and I just always have red flags going up. I mean, I hardly believe anything anyone tells me, unless I've come to understand them as a trusted authority on a particular topic. But even then, you know, if my hackles go up, I'm like, well, I should check into that more. So evidence-based. So that's what I mean by critical thinking. If somebody tells you that some device can do something, you know, that sounds quite outlandish, I say, well, how does it do it? And, you know, why are you the only one that knows about it? And then that sort of thing. So it's just basically just looking at everything rationally and demanding evidence in a nice way.
Yes. Yeah, the other way we look at it, because we have several critical thinking clubs around here that try and encourage that, it's not what you think, it's how you think. So it's taking a look at, you know, am I looking at all the evidence? Am I thinking about my own biases as well?
Yeah.
Because that's an incredibly deadly one to anyone, is you go with your biases and say, aha, that evidence supports my thing, and you miss the mountain next to it when you find this lovely little mountaintail of that.
Yeah.
And so that's, you know, one thing that does it in, and you have to be aware of those.
You do, and it's difficult too, because that's another thing that plays into it, that I find that it's difficult to find. I've found a good community of critical thinkers here in the Twin Cities. I forgot what I was going to say about the biases. Oh, it also requires that you be very self-aware. And that's something that's not really common either. I mean, you really need to be able to look at yourself and ask yourself, why am I thinking this way? If all of a sudden I'm very angry and upset, I ask myself, well, why? Do I have an emotional response to something that's going on? Is there something feeding into it? Am I correct to be this upset? Do the people I'm just about to yell at really deserve it? Or should I just examine and maybe just double check?
Yeah, it could be a number of different factors there. So yeah, it's just double checking your evidence on that.
So critical thinking and self-awareness, I think, are two. The self-awareness is a very important tool. Unfortunately, lacking.
That's definitely tough, because being aware that you say, you know, I'm as biased as the person whose argument I'm trying to cut in two, and realizing that, so that you can come in and listen and review that information better.
Yep.
Okay. So let's talk about the organization that you're part of, skeptic.org.
Well, people in the skeptical community may have heard of skeptic.org. Skeptic is run by Rebecca Watson, who is well known because she participates for the last several years in the Skeptic's Guide to the Universe, which is a very popular skeptical podcast recommended for anybody that's interested in critical thinking science. It's a very fun show. Rebecca plays a really big part in it. But before she was on Skeptic's Guide to the Universe, she had started a blog called Skeptic, so she could just blog about skeptical things. And she brought in a couple of other skeptics to blog with her, so it's a joint effort. And as time has gone on, she's brought in it's mostly women. We focus on skepticism, science, critical thinking. There's a fair bit of atheism in there because we're all atheists. And feminism, we definitely, especially lately, there's a lot of discussion about feminism, because just bringing the skeptical atheist movements, they're separate, but for the parts where they're the same, we've reached a stage in the development, I think, where we need to start thinking about the kind of social issues, about who are we inviting to our groups and who are we attracting. And so Skeptic really, you know, talks a lot about how we can get more women, minorities, gay, lesbian, participation in active skepticism and active atheism.
Which is a really cool thing, because when I joined my local group, I was, one, the youngest active person, and two, it was mostly old white males.
Yeah.
So we've gotten, since I've joined, much better, and we're moving faster than other groups, I think, have in history, because we're figuring out, there's some reasons for doing it this way, and the sensible ones work, and it brings in a whole bunch of different people and new ideas and different approaches that old white guys just don't think of.
Well, don't get me wrong, I love the old white guys just as much as anybody, but the thing is it's good for the old white guys, and it's good for the other people, for everybody to get together and talk about things and bring fresh ideas, approaches, open up areas that we wouldn't even have thought of looking at. Yeah, the diversity is kind of a big thing with Skeptic, and so we blog. So every day you're going to find maybe 2 or 3 new posts by, and we do have one male skeptic.
One guy, okay, that's good.
He's Sam, he's from Texas, and he's our male skeptic. Although we're open to more, when we put out a call for more, we certainly take all the applications. So you'll find articles on any number of topics. Some of them, we try for a sort of a snarky and fun approach, but it's definitely evidence-based. And there's a lively discussion going on in the comment sections all the time. Very interesting community there. So it's a good place to land if you're just thinking about skepticism. We're not without controversy, so it's not going to be just super straight science or anything like that. Given the topics we talk about, we get naysayers. So.
Yep, there's going to be opinion on there.
And that's fine. We welcome it.
Yep.
We totally welcome it. We're happy to have it. What I do for Skeptic is I organize events.
Okay.
Particularly here in the Twin Cities, a really important one. We have started having what we call Skepticon, and it is within Convergence.
Okay.
Convergence is a science fiction fantasy convention that's held over the 4th of July weekend in Bloomington.
Correct.
Used to be the Sheraton, but now it's the Doubletree.
It'll be a Doubletree. It's changed names multiple times. I'm very familiar with that hotel.
Yeah, so Convergence has been going on for a really long time.
It's turning 13.
Okay, is it 13? I knew it was over 10 years. And for the last, I think this will be our 4th or 5th, must be our 4th Skepticon. That what we're doing is we're sort of wedging ourselves in there and bringing the science and the skepticism. They really like us to focus on science, which is perfectly easy to do under the skeptical, atheist, free-thinking umbrella. We encourage a lot of science programming and bring in speakers and people, basically encourage a lot of people. We bring in a lot of skeptics, and then so we do science programming all throughout the day, and we're sponsoring that and bringing it along and watching it all. And then in the evening, one of the nice things about Convergence that people find different and better than other science fiction fantasy conventions is they have a dedicated party area basically where people can go around this atrium area basically, and there's rooms where people like skeptics have set up decorations. You might serve some drinks for donations, some food, but basically it's where you can go in and you can talk to people about your topic. What we really I love this idea for outreach because, you talk about skepticism to people, you talk about any of it, atheism, humanism, any of that, and people are like, why do you even need to get together and talk about that? Well, we have a lot of good reasons why we need, those, and we don't even really have time to go into all those. But what I like is for people to come and to see that we're not boring or fuddy-duddies, we'll have a couple drinks, we'll talk, there's lots of laughing, there's lots of fun, and you'll walk around the room and find the conversations are so varied and interesting. You're gonna find a biker talking to a scientist about whatever. I mean, people around here and all over the country actually know about P.Z. Myers. He comes to Skepticon and speaks for us. Greg Layden, Stephanie Savan, lots of local skeptics and scientists that we're very lucky to have in the Twin Cities. And this year, kind of a big new thing is that Free Thought Blogs, P.Z. Myers' network, well, it's not his, but it's all of them.
Yep, a whole big bunch.
He's their big 800-pound gorilla. So Free Thought Blogs is going to be working in collaboration with Skeptic on Skepticon. So it's still Skepticon, but it's new and improved with Free Thought Blogs. So they're going to have a room too, and science programming is going to be bigger and better this year. We really encourage people to get out there. You can find information about it on Skeptic. There'll be information about it on Free Thought Blogs, and
Yep, so people can find that on that, because I've attended many a Convergence. That is another one of my communities, is the science fiction fans. And science fiction fans have always been fairly skeptical about religion and that, so it's a very good audience for the free thought community. And this is their side where they let their hair down and dress in multiple costumes. It's very much you seeing the crazy nerdy types actually go crazy on that sort of thing.
I like it because it was the first science fiction fantasy convention I'd ever been to, even though I've been a science fiction fantasy nerd my whole life. And I felt so at home almost immediately. You could just be there and let your freak flag fly, or not, but just there's all sorts of people there, and it feels like a loving, warm, comfortable place, which is so difficult to find as a atheist, skeptic, humanist. We have our communities, but we come to our communities for refuge because in the greater world where we're in our jobs and you know, at the grocery store or whatever, we find ourselves inundated, basically surrounded by, I don't want to say the enemy, so to speak, but this thought process that is anti everything that we think and know.
Correct.
And so at a place like Convergence or any of the skeptical meetings around town or anything like that, it's just so nice to get amongst people where you can just be comfortable. You can say the stuff and you're not going to freak anybody out. And nobody's going to make an old pruny face at you like, what's wrong with you?
Yeah, and why are you talking about religion that way?
Yeah.
Yeah, that sort of thing. So yeah, it is a very comfortable community on that. And it's also great to get good science education out there, because I took my son last year and he just loved the panel where they were talking about the movies versus real science.
Yes.
And that one was great fun because he was just roaring in laughter once he found out a number of the examples.
Yeah, and I think Matt Lowry was on that, and he's always a really good presenter. He's really funny.
Yeah.
He's a physics teacher, and really...
Yeah, you have the real physics teacher talking about, especially Iron Man. It's like, no, is pretty much what he was saying on that. And then there was somebody who had biology, and their response was, and don't even talk about the biology.
I think this year we're going to have a panel on why superhero costumes wouldn't work in real life.
Okay.
Especially the female ones.
Yes,
so it ties
exactly.
in very nicely. We got your science fiction, we got your skepticism, you know, so a little bit of science and feminism. So I think that'll be an interesting panel.
That'll be great fun, because you can also bring in Dr. Jim, and he can bring in the physics as well, because he likes to do that. So, so you've got that, and what other things do you do to organize other than just that at this point?
Well, we're trying to have a skeptic presence at more cons of all sorts all over the country, all over the world. The truth is Rebecca travels a lot and has speaking engagements at a lot of them.
Okay.
And so what we'd like to do is have her, maybe more skeptics present, but do more outreach like we do at this one, like with not necessarily the big party like we do, but, just basically provide a place for people to come meet us and talk to us about skepticism and science and stuff like that. So we're trying to get into more events around the world. And Minnesota Skeptics has another group that I participate in. I don't get to go to as many of the meetings as I want, but we work with all the people. We're hoping to plan a Skeptic Amp here in Minneapolis.
Okay.
If people haven't heard of Skeptic Amp, it's an interesting thing to look up, where it's basically an open source con.
Okay.
Where it's got minimal. We're not going to bring in a bunch of big names or anything, but basically we'll plan it, we'll find a location, and then you put the call out, and local people who have a topic they want to talk about can get on the schedule and come in and talk for half an hour or an hour about their topic. And one of the hallmarks of Skeptic Camp, which is really interesting, is that it's very much audience participation, as in you can be presenting, but you'll be questioned as well.
Okay.
And it's not what's the word I'm looking for? Conflict. Exactly, but it's a free exchange between the audience and the speaker. It's very interesting. So you basically have talks all day long, and you break for lunch, maybe have dinner, and then we would love our event to be a 2-day event. They do one in Atlanta, and they do one in Denver, Colorado. I think they started in Denver, and so we would like to do that. And I think we want to. Atlanta and Denver have kind of their Skeptic Amp rivalry, where they pick on each other about, we had more people, we raised more funds, or whatever. We're going to have the same sort of thing with Chicago Skeptics.
Okay, that sounds good.
Yeah, so Skeptic Camp, Minnesota Skeptics is getting ready to plan one of those, and we're hoping early next year, like we're hoping in May.
Okay.
More information will be out about that.
So people can go to Minnesota Skeptics website and find info on that. Cool.
Yep, and if you get tired of going to Humanist meetings, you can come to some of the fun, there's several skeptical meetups. There's a late night drinking skeptically, and there's an early drinking skeptically, like once a month. And there's game night. Or no, that's the Minnesota Atheists. I'm sorry. There's Free Thinking Women, which is one that I've been to once, and really interesting and nice people. So comfortable. Yeah.
Yeah, because these things are what's neat about as our community has been growing, because what we've seen in the country is a growth of what's called the nuns. That means the people, when they call up the survey, are willing to say, no, I don't have a religious belief. And some of them will come to our community. Some of them have no clue we're out there. Yeah. Like you, and I grew up in a small town, so it's like, there's nobody else who really wants to be an atheist around here. They're usually referred to by denigrating terms rather than as being a positive influence in this society. Yeah. So helping people find those so that we can find their part of the community and help them plug in and sort of, find their enthusiasm like you and I have.
Yeah, and there's so many good reasons for people to do that. I mean, I'm always irritated by people, particularly in the topic of atheism, when people say, well, what do you need to get together and talk about there's no God? And I'm like, we don't talk about there's no God. We talk about how you, God believers, are trying to take over everything else. And it's important because the separation of church and state protects you, the believer, and me, the non-believer. But you, the believer, are trying to tear that down, and you think that's going to be good for you, but it's not. So it's important for us to gather. In skepticism, it's important to get together, and we on Skeptic regularly organize like write-ins or petitions to people who are advertising for anti-vaccination. Public health issues like this. So, you know, what we like to do is we like to get, even if people just come for the fun and the comfort, even if people just come because it's the break from the irrational world and they can come to a rational place. Once we get them there, I think it's important to have a big community, find as many people as you can and bring them in. And then there's going to be a number of them who are going to want to be active and they're going to want to do things. So when, you know, we have a call out for sign this petition, call your congressman, we're going to have a lot of people who do that. We're going to have a lot of people who want to come in and speak at Skeptic Amp or, you know, visit us at Skepticon and stuff like that. And that's why I think outreach is important. I want to get them in the door.
Right.
And then there's a lot of other people who will show them what to do.
Yeah, there's always that, but we have to be, you know, firm about that because organizing skeptics and humanists is very challenging.
Yes.
Yeah. So
it's free thinkers, you know. They don't want to be led and they don't want to be told. They got to think it through themselves, and I think it takes a special kind of leader to be just like. I mean, one of the things that's most difficult is that we argue with the people who aren't rational, shall we say, right? And amongst ourselves, we argue about how to argue with the non-rationalists, which I just find really interesting. But what I've just come to understand is that everybody in our, well, most people, I should say, everybody's that's not a very rational thing to say, but it's like we're just free thinking. I mean, we just have a lot of opinions and we have ideas about how things should be done. And a lot of times you just have to plant seeds. You just have to say, here's a good idea, what do you think? And see where it goes. Yep,
that's one of the approaches. But just talk briefly about why you guys will look at things like vaccination. I know when you go to Dragon Con, you even have a vaccination clinic down there.
Well, okay, so for people who don't know about this, there is a large, well-funded push in this country right now, and they're actually trying to spread across the world, of people who are anti-vaccination. And it started and was pushed along by a guy named Andrew Wakefield 20 years ago, wrote a report which, as it turns out, was written for money and had a lot of false information in it, has since been debunked, and he's been taken it was retracted in the medical journal it was printed in. But basically the idea is that vaccines cause autism or cause other problems for children, and convincing parents not to vaccinate their children. It's such an interesting thing how 100 years ago people were dying. And one of the greatest scientific advancements in our history, literally in our history, was vaccines. And for the public health of being able to vaccinate people so that children weren't getting these diseases and dying, so that people were living longer and healthier lives. I mean, it's like really one of the most important scientific discoveries ever. And for a long time, everybody knew you get vaccinated and we were all healthy and there was the herd immunity. And then some people started saying you shouldn't do that, and it's just snowballed. And so there's a large group of people who are telling other people not to vaccinate, and they're not vaccinating. And you could say, well, so what? Some people don't vaccinate. Well, what's happening is that we're having outbreaks of measles in whooping cough, for heaven's sakes. There's babies dying of whooping cough in 2010.
Yes.
And I'm a parent. And I'm frustrated. I mean, basic human rights, involve the proper medical care. And when there are some people using uncritical thinking, using basically lies and no evidence to convince people not to do something, it falls into all the categories that touch my buttons. It's anti-intellectual, it's anti-science, it's irrational and non-critical thinking. So, the skeptical movement, there's quite a few of us who push towards promoting vaccinations to help counteract the anti-vaccination propaganda that's out there.
Yeah, and that's a good thing to be doing because, we are both, humans as individuals, but we're also herds. We live in big things called cities, and things can whip through there.
And they do, and people die. I mean, people have gotten so lax. I mean, all these people can sit around and talk about how vaccination is so bad for you and blah, blah. The link between vaccination and autism has absolutely never been proven, and in fact, it has been proven not to exist.
Correct.
There have been no studies that show it positively, and the thing that they say was causing the autism, once that was removed, the autism rates didn't go down. I mean, there's all sorts of evidence. So it's like there is risk in vaccination.
Correct.
But it is less than the risk of the diseases.
Exactly.
And 100 years ago, people lost their whole families to some of these diseases and wished for what we have now.
Yeah, we can go back and look at that just by going into the cemeteries.
Yes.
Okay, we're down to the last couple of minutes. So what's just a quick way for people who want to get started in skepticism but don't know where to start?
Well, people in the Twin Cities are really lucky because you have a lot of groups to go to. So visit Minnesota Skeptics. There's a meetup group.
Okay.
And you can find it on minnesotaskeptics.org. And people outside of Minnesota and in Minnesota can read skeptic.org, because even if you don't feel social and you want to go to anything, you can start reading articles. I mean, I can promise you, you'll get interested, you'll want to do something, and then you're going to want to talk to people about those things. So start at Skeptic. Listen to the Skeptic's Guide to the Universe. Those are great introductions.
Are there good books and magazines that you know of?
Well,
for those even scared by that fancy interwebs thing?
There's the Center for Inquiry puts out a magazine, and to be honest, I don't know as much about the magazines because it just seems so
old-fashioned,
not
interactive.
It's not on the internet. I can't do it.
When they show the babies touching the magazine and the iPads, and it's going, the magazine doesn't move.
Yeah, what's it doing? No, but the Center for Inquiry puts out a magazine, and Michael Shermer has a magazine
called The Skeptic.
The Skeptic.
And it's Skeptical Inquirer, put out by the Council for Secular Humanism.
Yep.
Yeah, those are both very good. They take a look at, they're saying X is going on, we're going to look into it. We're going to treat it as serious, and we're going to use good science to investigate it and come up to it and go, not going to work.
Yeah.
So, okay.
So I would really just encourage people to come out to one of our meetups and hang out with us.
That sounds very good. So I want to thank you for joining me on this program. It's been great to have you talk about this, and I hope that gets you interested in reading more about skepticism and seeing why it's important as part of critical thinking and humanism and free thought. It's the ability to get past those things that are programmed into our animal part of our brain and learning to overcome those so that we can be what Carl Sagan called that candle in the darkness, because that's all we've got. Revelation from the sky does not work in solving problems. So for more information about us, the Humanists of Minnesota, you can go to our website at humanistofmn.org. You can also, we'd like to hear what you think about this program. So send us an email, give us a phone call, or send one of those old-fashioned letters you write on and fold in an envelope and mail. We'd like to hear from you. I'd like to thank you for joining me on this edition of Humanist Views. I'm Scott Lohman. Good night.